I pulled up an empty dive suit once, and the inside was still warm. I can't explain how that's possible, but I'll never forget the feeling of the water dripping off the fabric, as if someone had just climbed out seconds earlier. Down here in the Mariana Trench, survival depends on following rules that sound insane to anyone who hasn't been below these depths. There are 11 of them in total, and I've seen what happens when even one gets ignored. I remember the first time I broke one of the rules, and that was the moment I realized something else was watching us from the dark. The first rule they drilled into me was simple but terrifying. Never pull up an empty suit unless ordered. At first I thought it was just a joke to scare new divers, like some grim initiation ritual, but the seriousness in my supervisor's voice told me otherwise. We weren't supposed to question it, just follow. That rule echoed in my head the first time I saw a suit drifting in the floodlights, bobbing weightlessly in the black water. It looked like a man floating, arms swaying gently, but no bubbles rose from it, no movement at all, and that was when I remembered the rule. I hovered in place, flashlight beam shaking slightly as I steadied my breathing. The suit drifted closer, spinning slowly in the current, and the helmet caught the light. For a split second, I swore I saw a reflection, a face staring back at me from behind the glass. But then it was gone. My comms crackled with static. No voices, just broken fragments, like someone whispering through a storm. My instinct screamed at me to reach out, grab the line, and haul it back. But the rule whispered louder. Never pull up an empty suit unless ordered. I tried to focus on the numbers on my depth gauge, grounding myself in something logical. The suit floated just ahead, close enough now that if I stretched out my hand I could have brushed my glove against it. I hesitated, and that's when I noticed something strange. The arms of the suit were slightly bent inward, as if holding something against its chest, though the fabric sagged where a body should have been. My heart raced faster, every second stretching longer than it should. The silence around me felt wrong, like even the ocean had paused to see what I'd do. Then my radio clicked alive. "Leave it," the voice said, sharp and urgent. It was the commander topside, his tone harsher than I'd ever heard it. I froze, relief mixing with dread, because I realized how close I'd come to breaking the rule. The suit drifted past me, brushing the edge of my shoulder, and as it did, I felt a coldness seep through the thick layers of my gear, a chill that wasn't from the water. I forced myself not to look back, not to follow its path, even though my mind burned with questions I wasn't supposed to ask. When I surfaced, I expected answers. Instead, I got silence. The crew avoided my eyes, busying themselves with equipment checks and paperwork, as if pretending nothing unusual had happened. Later, when I finally cornered one of the veteran divers, he just shook his head. "Don't touch them," he muttered, his eyes glassy and distant. "You don't want to know what climbs inside those suits." His words replayed in my mind as I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying not to imagine what would have happened if I had pulled it up. And yet part of me already knew I'd learn the truth soon enough. The next dive wasn't any easier. I carried the weight of that drifting figure in my mind, every flicker of shadow in the dark pulling my attention. We descended deeper, where the light barely reached, and the pressure squeezed tight around my ribs. My partner that day was Jensen, a skeptic who laughed off most of the rules. He whispered over comms about how stupid it was, how they treated us like children afraid of ghost stories. I told him about the suit I'd seen, but he just chuckled, calling it underwater junk. Still, I noticed he stayed a little closer to me than usual. Halfway through the dive, Jensen spotted something snagged against the jagged rock below. My stomach dropped when the beam revealed it. Another empty suit. The fabric rippled slightly, though no current touched it. Jensen muttered, "See? Just trash," and started moving toward it. I yelled his name, reminding him of the first rule, my voice cracking through the headset. He hesitated, one hand reaching out, then laughed again, a hollow sound that didn't fit the moment. He pulled the suit free, bubbles rising around him, and began hauling it upward. The moment he tugged, the water shifted. The darkness around us felt heavier, like something had stirred awake. My lights flickered, dimming for a heartbeat, before snapping back on. In that flicker, I thought I saw more suits, dozens of them, suspended in the shadows like a silent audience. My pulse roared in my ears as I shouted at Jensen to let go, but he kept pulling, grunting with effort, insisting it was nothing. Then the line he was tethered to jerked sharply, as if something unseen had grabbed it from below. His scream cut through comms, raw and panicked. I lunged toward him, grabbing his harness, trying to anchor us both, but the pull was too strong. Whatever had claimed that suit wanted him too. His voice filled my ears, babbling, begging, then cutting off abruptly. The tether went slack. In the beam of my flashlight, the suit he'd been dragging floated upward, but Jensen was gone. No trail of bubbles, no sign of struggle, just silence. I stared at that hollow shell rising before me, and realized with ice-cold certainty, the rules weren't superstition, they were survival, and Jensen had just proven what breaking the first one costs. The night after Jensen vanished, I sat in the mess hall staring at a bowl of cold soup I couldn't bring myself to eat. Conversations around me were hushed, the usual laughter replaced by uneasy silence. Every crew member seemed to avoid my gaze, as though speaking about what had happened would invite the same fate upon them. That was when Commander Rook called me aside, his weathered face tight with exhaustion. He reminded me of Rule 2. Never dive alone, even for a minute, his voice low but forceful, as if repeating it too loudly might summon something from the dark. The next morning they paired me with Callahan, one of the most experienced divers on the rig. He was older, gruff, and didn't waste words, which suited me just fine. The memory of Jensen's scream still echoed in my mind, and the thought of going down again made bile rise in my throat. But orders were orders. As we suited up, Callahan muttered something about keeping the buddy line taut, and I nodded quickly, clinging to the comfort of his presence. Even so, when the water closed over my helmet, I felt the same crushing loneliness, as if the ocean swallowed not just sound, but the entire world. We descended together, our beams cutting into the murk, illuminating only fragments of the vast trench wall. I tried to steady my nerves by counting my breaths, each one fogging the inside of my visor before the vent whisked it away. Callahan's shadow moved steadily beside me, and I forced myself to stay within arm's reach. The tether line between us tugged lightly with every movement, a fragile reminder that I wasn't alone. Still, the ocean had a way of making you feel small, like even two people weren't enough against the weight of everything pressing down from above. Halfway through the dive, we stopped to inspect a cable line running along the trench. The pressure gauge flickered briefly, then steadied, but the interruption made my nerves spike again. I looked over at Callahan and saw him adjusting his helmet lamp, his movements deliberate, practiced. For a fleeting second, I let my eyes wander elsewhere, following a shimmer in the darkness, and when I turned back, he wasn't there. My chest tightened as I spun in circles, beams slicing the water, searching. The tether line hung slack, drifting away into the shadows as if it had been severed. Panic clawed at my throat. My breathing quickened, fogging the glass. I grabbed at the line, tugging hard, but it slipped loose like it had no anchor. Callahan, I whispered into the comms, but only static answered. The loneliness was immediate, crushing, a void of silence pressing harder than the sea itself. I remembered then the rule, the one drilled into us after Jensen: never dive alone. And yet here I was, adrift in black water, the rule already broken, not by choice but by some cruel trick. The water around me felt thicker, harder to push against, as though unseen currents swirled just out of sight. In the edge of my vision, movement flickered, shapes darting back and vanishing before my light caught them. I tried to calm myself, telling my mind they were fish or debris, but deep down I knew better. My suit sensors blinked faintly, detecting pressure shifts that didn't match any current we'd charted. Something was circling me, something large. My instinct screamed to ascend, but the thought of turning my back to that unseen presence rooted me in place. Then, through the static, a voice hissed, "Don't drift." It wasn't Callahan. The tone was flat, metallic, like a recording warped by distance. My blood ran cold, because no one else was supposed to be on comms. I turned sharply, my light flashing over the trench wall, and that was when I saw him, or something shaped like him. Another suit, drifting slowly toward me, arms outstretched, but unlike the one Jensen had touched, this one wasn't empty. Shadows pressed against the inside of the helmet, shifting unnaturally, like smoke trapped behind the glass. I forced myself backward, tugging the tether line instinctively, and to my shock it went taut again. I looked down. Callahan was there, below me, hauling on the rope, his lamp cutting a narrow beam through the dark. Relief crashed over me, but when I looked back at the suit ahead, it was gone. No bubbles, no ripples, just empty water. Callahan barked through the comms, telling me to keep my head straight, warning me not to drift off again. I didn't have the strength to argue. I just tightened my grip on the line and followed him upward. Back on deck, I ripped off my helmet, gasping as if I'd been drowning the whole time. Callahan studied me quietly, then muttered, "That's how it starts. You think you're alone, that's when they come close." His words sent a chill deeper than the coldest current. Later, lying awake in my bunk, I realized what he meant. The rule wasn't just about safety, about preventing accidents in hostile waters. It was about keeping whatever lurked out there from noticing when one of us was vulnerable, separated, easy to take, and the worst part was knowing how easily it had almost claimed me. The next dive, they paired me with two rookies, fresh faces who still smiled like this was just another job. I wanted to warn them, to tell them what I'd seen in the shadows, but the commander's glare silenced me. Instead, I clipped into the line with them, silently repeating the rule in my head, clinging to it like a prayer. As we descended again into the abyss, I kept the rope tight, refusing to let even an inch of slack separate us. Because now I understood the truth. You never dive alone here, not even for a minute. The morning after my dive with the rookies, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back to the surface. My dreams were restless, filled with distorted voices whispering through the darkness, always just beyond recognition. Commander Rourke found me pale and sleepless in the galley, and pressed his hand against my shoulder with surprising weight. He reminded me of Rule 3, never answer a voice that calls you by name, and the firmness in his tone left no room for questions. That was when I realized this wasn't just superstition. It was preparation for something inevitable. That night, I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the generators below deck. The sound had always been steady, almost soothing, but now it seemed to pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the steel hull, the ocean whispered in currents. I couldn't hear but somehow felt. Then faintly, as if carried through miles of water, I heard it, my own name. Eli. It wasn't shouted, wasn't urgent. It was soft, coaxing, like a friend inviting me closer. My skin prickled and my throat tightened, but I remembered the rule. I stayed still, silent, pretending I hadn't heard. By the time morning came, I'd convinced myself it was exhaustion, my mind inventing things to match my fears. But the dives didn't wait for my rest. I was paired again with Callahan, who studied me with those tired, sunken eyes that seemed to see too much. He didn't ask if I'd heard it. He simply clipped the line between us and muttered, "If it happens again, don't be stupid. Ignore it." His warning made my stomach churn, because it told me he'd heard it too, at some point. He just wasn't willing to talk about what had happened when he first did. The descent that day was routine at first. We followed the cable down into the dim blue until it gave way to black, lamps our only salvation. The silence pressed in thickly, broken only by the occasional hiss of my respirator. Then, cutting through the static of the comms, I heard it again, clearer this time, unmistakable. "Eli, come closer." My light jerked across the water instinctively, searching for the source, but nothing waited in the beam. Callahan's voice snapped through comms, sharp and low, "Ignore it." The calm in his tone was thin, stretched taut like a wire about to break. I clenched my jaw, every nerve screaming at me to respond, to ask who it was, but I knew the rule. I forced my focus onto the cable, tracing my gloved hand along its length, refusing to turn toward the direction the voice came from. Still it persisted. "Eli, I need your help." This time the voice was different. It was Jensen's. My gut twisted violently because Jensen was gone. I had watched him vanish beneath the water, swallowed whole. Yet the tone, the pitch, even the breathless way he spoke, it was him. I bit down on my tongue until I tasted copper, using pain as my anchor. Callahan must have sensed my hesitation. "Don't you dare," he muttered over the line. "That's not him. They sound like the ones you miss most. That's how they get you." His words cut deeper than the water around me. If they could sound like Jensen, then what else could they imitate? What if they could mimic anyone, even the commander, even Callahan himself? The thought chilled me worse than the trench water ever could. I tightened my grip on the rope, shutting my eyes, pushing forward 1 foot at a time until the sound faded into static again. When we surfaced, I didn't remove my helmet right away. My hands shook too violently to unclip the seals. Callahan did it for me. His expression unreadable, but I noticed the slight tremor in his own fingers. Later, when we were alone, he finally admitted, "Mine sounded like my daughter. She's been dead 5 years." He didn't say more, didn't need to. The image rooted in my mind, stronger than anything I'd seen in the water. Whatever lived in those depths wasn't just hunting us, it was studying us, learning the voices that would break us quickest. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I heard it again. My name, whispered right outside the thin wall of steel, closer than before. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't stop. It sank straight into my thoughts. "Eli, open the hatch. I'm waiting." My stomach clenched at the sound of metal shifting faintly, the subtle groan of weight against the hull. I stared at the bolted door, terrified that if I moved, I'd see the wheel begin to turn on its own. I prayed for dawn, for the humming of machinery to drown it out, but the voice never left. It just grew patient, like it knew I would eventually break. By the 3rd day, I no longer doubted the rule. My crew noticed my exhaustion, the shadows under my eyes, but no one offered comfort. They all knew. Each one of them had heard their own name in the dark at some point. Each one had been tempted to answer. Some hadn't returned from those calls, and their names never appeared in the logs. The commander kept the roster tidy, as if removing their existence erased the fact they had ever been here at all. And yet in the trench, their voices remained, waiting for someone else to listen. I've learned to hold my silence now, no matter how badly I want to answer. But silence doesn't save you from the knowledge that something is trying to get in, something that wears the voices of the lost like masks. Every time I hear Jensen calling my name, I feel the urge to turn toward the water, to believe he's still out there. And deep down, a part of me knows that if I ever do answer, it won't be Jensen I'm speaking to. It will be the thing that took him, and it has been waiting all along. The night after I heard Jensen's voice calling me, I barely slept. My dreams blurred with waking visions, the sound of whispers bleeding into the hum of the engines. When morning came, I was summoned to the briefing room, where Commander Rook leaned over the map of the trench. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Instead, he fixed me with a hard stare and repeated Rule 4, keep your helmet light on, no matter what you see. His tone carried no room for argument, and the other divers around the table avoided my eyes, as if they already knew why the reminder was necessary. By midday, I was back in my suit, strapped into the winch as the crane lowered me and Callahan into the water. The surface light faded quickly, replaced by the artificial glow of our lamps. I kept my beam steady, remembering the commander's warning. It seemed like such a simple rule, just leave the light on. But down here, simple things had ways of unraveling into something sinister. At 8,000 meters, the trench was absolute night, the kind of black that pressed against your visor like a living thing. Without the light, you weren't just blind, you were prey. We descended along a cable that had snapped from one of the rigs above. Our job was to secure a replacement line and check for damage. Callahan worked efficiently, his gloved hands adjusting clamps, while I scanned the dark for movement. My lamp beam cut a narrow cone, illuminating only fragments of the vast nothing that surrounded us. Still, I felt the weight of endless shapes waiting just beyond its reach. My fingers twitched against the control switch, temptation rising to test what would happen if I flicked the light off, even for a second. But the rule was clear, and I wasn't about to test it. Then I noticed something strange. Beyond the reach of my light, in the corner of the dark, something shimmered faintly. It wasn't the reflection of my own beam. It pulsed faintly, like bioluminescence, and moved with deliberate slowness. I froze, my hand tightening on the cable. The glow inched closer, spreading faintly along the water as though hundreds of tiny eyes were opening at once. My comms buzzed, and Callahan's voice cut through. "Don't look too long, just focus on your lamp. Remember the rule." His words snapped me back, but the urge to follow that glow nearly overwhelmed me. We finished repairing the line, but the strange light didn't fade. It followed us, always just outside the reach of our lamps, as though teasing us to switch them off and see what it really was. Back on the rig, I asked Callahan what it might have been. He just stared at me, lips pressed tight, and finally muttered, "Not everything wants to hide. Some things want to be found. That's worse." His words chilled me more than anything I'd seen, because they confirmed what I already suspected. The light was bait, and we were the catch. The next dive drove the rule home in ways I hadn't imagined. This time I was paired with a rookie named Morgan, barely 20, and eager to prove himself. He joked as we suited up, pretending to fumble his helmet latch just to get a laugh. But when we descended, his bravado crumbled fast. The dark swallowed his nerves, and I could hear the quiver in his breathing. Halfway through the dive, I caught his beam flicker. He'd turned the switch halfway, as if testing it. My heart seized, and I barked his name over comms, ordering him to stop. He laughed nervously, but I could hear the fear beneath it. Minutes later it happened. His lamp cut out completely. 1 second his light was there beside me. The next it vanished, leaving me alone in the cone of my own beam. Panic clawed at my throat as I spun, searching. "Morgan, turn it back on," I shouted, but his voice came through broken, filled with static. Then faintly, I saw him. His silhouette drifted just beyond the edge of my light, a dark figure in the endless black. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw dozens of hands reaching out toward him, pale shapes curling from the dark around his suit. I lunged forward, gripping his harness, and slammed my hand onto his switch. His light snapped back on, flooding the space between us with sharp white. The hands, the shapes, gone in an instant, leaving only rippling water. Morgan's face was pale behind the visor, eyes wide with terror. He didn't speak for the rest of the dive. When we surfaced, he vomited inside his helmet before they could get it off. I didn't blame him. I'd nearly done the same. We both knew what would have happened if I hadn't reached him in time. Later that night, I passed Morgan in the corridor. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, and his eyes darted to every shadow. "They were right there," he whispered. "They were pulling me in, I felt them." I wanted to tell him it was just fear, just a trick of the dark, but I couldn't, because I had seen them too. Shapes that weren't shadows, fingers that weren't mine, and the truth lodged heavy in my chest. If his light had stayed off even a moment longer, he would have vanished like Jensen, pulled into the trench by something waiting for its chance. I sleep with a lamp beside my bunk now. It does little against the whispers, but it helps me breathe. The others notice, but they don't comment. They know. We've all seen the things that move in the dark, just out of reach, waiting for us to slip. The light is our only defense, fragile as it is, and every time I descend into the trench, I repeat the rule silently to myself like a prayer. Keep your helmet light on, no matter what you see, because one flicker of curiosity is all it takes for the dark to win. By the time I had adjusted to the rhythm of life on the rig, there were nights when the silence of the trench felt almost normal. But normal never lasted here. At the next briefing, Commander Ruark's voice dropped low, as though speaking the words aloud gave them weight. Rule 5. Never pull an empty suit to the surface. He scanned the table slowly, meeting each diver's eyes in turn, but when his gaze landed on me, he lingered. Something in the way he said it, deliberate and final, sent a ripple of unease crawling under my skin. I thought I understood. An empty suit meant one of ours had gone, lost to the dark. Bringing it back up would be a reminder of failure, maybe even bad luck. But Callahan corrected me after the meeting, pulling me aside with his gruff, smoke-bitten voice. "It's not about respect," he muttered. "It's about safety. That suit isn't empty when you see it." "Not really. Don't ask me to explain more than that." Then he turned and left, leaving me with a cold knot of questions in my chest. 2 days later, I found out exactly what he meant. We were assigned to recover debris from a collapsed submersible pod, scattered across a ledge nearly 11 kilometers deep. The trench walls loomed like cathedral pillars, jagged and uneven, swallowing every sound but the slow hiss of my respirator. As we worked, my beam swept across something drifting in the current. A suit. Its helmet was cracked, chest plate bent, but it hung suspended as if the body inside were weightless. I froze, heart hammering. The name tag was scorched beyond reading. At first, I thought it was just a remnant from the pod, but then the arm moved. Not a drift, not the lazy tug of water. The arm twitched sharply, fingers curling in toward the palm. My breath hitched as I whispered the sight over comms. "Ignore it," Callahan snapped instantly. His tone was sharper than I'd ever heard. "Mark the coordinates. Move on. Don't you dare touch it." My instincts screamed at me to obey, but I couldn't stop staring. The visors inside was dark, yet I swore something shifted behind the glass, pressing forward like a face straining to meet mine. I turned my beam away and focused on the debris, but the suit kept drifting closer, as though drawn by our presence. It hovered just outside my reach, helmet angled toward me, like it was waiting. The temptation was suffocating. Every diver I'd ever known was a brother or sister in the deep, and every bone in me wanted to drag that suit back, to not leave it behind. But Callahan's warning echoed in my head, and for once I listened. We ascended without it. That night, I asked Ruark what would have happened if I'd pulled it up. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing with the weight of old memories. He didn't answer directly, but his silence spoke volumes. Finally, he muttered, "It never stays empty when it breaks the surface. What comes out isn't what went in." His words chilled me deeper than the water itself, and I realized with a sinking certainty that whatever we'd left down there wasn't a corpse. It was something else wearing a suit. The next week proved his warning wasn't superstition. Another crew stationed further north reported a retrieval gone wrong. They'd brought up an empty suit they found snagged on a rock shelf. By the time it was winched onto the deck, the cameras showed movement inside, something shifting against the restraints. The log ended there. A day later, their rig went silent, and command cut all transmissions. Rumors spread fast. Some said they'd seen the crew vanish on live feed, one by one, dragged into the dark, by the very suit they'd pulled up. Even knowing that, the rules test us. I saw it again during a dive, with Morgan, the rookie still shaky after his helmet light ordeal. We were checking stabilizers along the trench edge when he spotted a figure wedged in a crevice. He called out, relief flooding his voice. "We've got one of ours." I turned, and my stomach flipped. It was another suit, pristine this time, upright as if standing in the crack. Its hands hung loose, but the visor was pressed flush to the rock. There was no sign of struggle, no damage, just waiting. Morgan drifted closer, reaching out before I could stop him. I shouted, ordering him back, but the suit reacted before he could touch it. The helmet tilted toward him in a sudden jerking motion, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. His scream tore through comms as he scrambled back, thrusters firing wild. The suit didn't follow. It just turned slowly, like it was tracking us, memorizing the way we moved. I grabbed him by the arm and forced us upward, my pulse thundering louder than the roar of the pumps. Back on deck, Morgan wouldn't speak. He just sat against the wall, shivering, eyes locked on nothing. When I asked what he saw, he whispered, "It smiled." I swear to God, it smiled. I wanted to tell him it was impossible, that maybe the reflection of his own lamp had warped inside the visor. But deep down, I knew the truth. The empty suits aren't empty. They're waiting vessels, shells for something else. And the rule exists because once you bring them up, you're no longer just dealing with the ocean. You're dealing with what the ocean hides. Since then, every dive feels like a gamble. Sometimes I catch suits drifting far below us, suspended like forgotten marionettes. Sometimes they're closer, almost brushing against the cables, their helmets turning ever so slightly to follow. I keep my distance. I obey the rule. But there's always that gnawing voice in my head asking, what if one of those suits belongs to someone we lost? What if Jensen's in there, calling, waiting? And yet, even as the thought claws at me, the fear of what might really be inside always wins. Now, when I close my eyes, I dream of the deck filled with suits, each one standing upright, helmets fogged from breath that isn't ours. In the dream, they move in unison, stepping forward as the waves crash against the hull. I wake drenched in sweat, the hum of the rig's engines drowned out by the phantom scrape of boots on steel. And though I try to push it from my mind, I know this much with certainty: if I ever break Rule 5, it won't be me that comes back up. I never understood silence until I lived in the trench. Down here, sound doesn't vanish. It lingers, stretching across miles like a ghost, searching for a host. One night during briefing, Commander Ruark leaned across the table and pressed his palms flat, eyes locked on us. His voice was low, sharp enough to cut steel as he said, "Rule 6, never answer when the ocean calls your name." At first, I thought it was a metaphor, some poetic warning about staying focused, but the look in his eyes wasn't poetic. It was fear disguised as authority. The first time it happened to me, I almost broke. We were repairing an exterior cable along the rig's lower frame, lights glowing faint in the abyss. I drifted near the edge, securing clamps, when through the comms, or maybe beyond them, I heard it, my name, clear, crisp, not distorted, not mechanical, just my name, spoken in a voice that sounded like my mother's. I froze, pressing a hand against my helmet, as though I could block the sound. The others kept working, oblivious. Then it came again, softer this time, stretched long like it was seeping through water instead of air. I wanted to respond. I wanted to say I heard it, to ask how it knew me, to remind myself I wasn't alone. My tongue sat heavy against the mic, but the weight of Ruark's warning pressed harder. I clenched my fists until my gloves ached and forced myself to turn away. The voice didn't stop. It kept repeating my name, slow and steady, like it had all the time in the world. By the time I finished the clamps, my hands were shaking so violently, I almost dropped the wrench. When I surfaced, I told no one, but I wasn't the only one. Morgan admitted a week later that he'd heard his sister calling during a dive. He said it felt so real, he nearly broke formation to follow the sound. She was laughing, he whispered, eyes glassy, like we were kids again. How the hell does the ocean know that? Callahan silenced him with a glare, muttering that talking about it only made it worse. But Morgan wasn't wrong. The voices knew us, not just our names, but the people and memories tied to them. The trench wasn't speaking randomly. It was choosing carefully. One night Jensen slipped. We found his harness unclipped, suit drifting just beyond the lights, body stiff. The report blamed equipment failure, but I knew better. I'd been nearby. I'd heard his name whispered, in a tone that didn't belong in this world. It wasn't desperate or commanding. It was gentle, coaxing, the way you'd call a pet inside during a storm. He must have answered. Maybe not with words, maybe just by moving toward it. Either way, he was gone. His suit hung in the dark like a flag of surrender, visor turned inward as though ashamed. Rourke gathered us after and reminded us, his voice harder than stone. You think you're strong, but the ocean is patient. It'll use every face, every memory, every weakness you've buried. Do not answer, not with words, not with movement, not even with thought. He paused, staring at Jensen's empty chair. If it knows you're listening, it already owns you. That night I barely slept, replaying the voice over and over, wondering if by hearing it I had already answered in some way I didn't understand. The more time passed, the worse it became. Sometimes I'd hear my father calling. Sometimes it was Rourke himself, his voice so exact I almost broke calm silence to reply. The cruelest was when it mimicked my own voice. Imagine hearing yourself cry for help from a distance, begging, choking, desperate. The first time I heard it, I clawed at my controls, thrusters jerking me sideways, searching frantically for the source. Callahan gripped my arm and yanked me back into formation, snarling through comms. That isn't you, and it never will be. Keep moving. One mission almost killed me. We were laying new relay lines when the voice came again, this time clearer than ever. Come closer, it said, using my mother's voice, words crisp as air. It's safe here, you don't have to be afraid. My chest tightened, eyes burning with the illusion of comfort. I reached out before I realized it, fingertips brushing the tether that separated me from the black. Then something moved in the darkness, a shadow with no shape, only the faint impression of arms, stretching wide, waiting to embrace me. I shut my eyes and forced my thrusters upward, heart tearing itself against my ribs. Back on deck, I finally confronted Rourke. What happens if we answer? I demanded. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. You stop being you, he said flatly. Your voice answers, but your body stays. And then one day, it's not your voice calling anymore, it's theirs, using you to lure the next fool in. His words settled over me like lead. I realized the voices weren't calling for companionship. They were fishing, and we were the bait. Now every time I dive, I feel the weight of Rule 6 pressing against me. I've learned to hum inside my helmet, to drown out the sound when it starts, to anchor myself with noise that belongs only to me. But the voices are clever. They wait until the quietest moment, when the only sound is the blood rushing in my ears. They whisper my name like a prayer, like a promise, like an answer I've been waiting my whole life to hear. And every time, it cuts a little deeper. Sometimes I think about Jensen, about the way his body drifted into the trench, the tether of his suit swaying like a broken pendulum. Did he feel relief in those last seconds, thinking he'd been reunited with someone he loved? Or did the truth hit him only when it was too late, when the water swallowed him whole and the voice behind the name finally showed its face? The thought keeps me awake, gnawing at my sanity like salt on open wounds. I know this much: one day, I'll hear a voice I won't be able to resist. One day, the ocean will call my name with the exact tone I've been waiting for, and I'll want to answer more than I've ever wanted anything. When that happens, I pray I'll still remember Rourke's warning, because the moment I answer, I won't be me anymore. I'll just be another voice in the abyss, waiting to call the next diver home. It was after Jensen's loss, and the whispers that haunted us, that Rourke gave us the next warning. He stood in the mess hall, with a map of the trench lit up behind him, glowing with points we'd never seen before. His finger traced a path downward into the black. As he said, Rule 7, never look directly at the lights below you. The words sounded absurd at first. How could there be lights that deep past where any sun had ever touched? But his eyes were grave, and when I caught Callahan avoiding my gaze, I knew this wasn't superstition. The first time I saw them, I thought I was losing oxygen. We were surveying a drop-off, cables stretching into a canyon so deep our sensors barely registered a floor. I adjusted my beam, and in the corner of my visor, faint pinpricks shimmered below, scattered like stars across the abyss. I almost leaned closer, curious, but instinct yanked me back. I remembered the rule. I told myself it was bioluminescent creatures, ordinary life clinging to rock, but the pattern was wrong. The lights weren't scattered, they were arranged in lines, deliberate and geometric, pulsing faintly like they were alive and waiting. I reported nothing. The others didn't mention it either, but when we resurfaced, Callahan cornered me on deck. His jaw was tight, his voice lower than a whisper. "You saw them, didn't you?" I hesitated, then nodded. His lips pressed thin, and he muttered, "You did right not to look too long. The ones who stare, they don't come back the same." He never explained further, but the way his hand trembled as he lit a cigarette told me enough. Morgan wasn't as strong. A week later, during a stabilizer inspection, he broke formation. His lamp beam jerked downward, freezing in place. "Do you see that?" he breathed, voice trembling with awe. I turned my head, careful to keep my eyes above the drop-off, but his tone sent a spike of dread through me. "They're beautiful, perfect, like they're calling me." I shouted through comms, ordering him back, but it was too late. His thrusters sputtered as his body went limp, arms drifting upward like a puppet with cut strings. Callahan darted down and hauled him back by the harness, dragging him toward the rig as Morgan screamed and kicked, desperate to look back. On deck, he was pale, sweat soaking his undersuit, eyes glazed as though staring at something none of us could see. "They showed me," he whispered, clutching his temples. "They showed me what waits below. It's not dark, it's endless light." When Rourke demanded he explain, Morgan broke into a fit of sobbing, laughter tearing through it like madness. They locked him in isolation, but at night I could hear him muttering through the bulkheads, describing visions of towering spires, glowing with impossible colors, and shapes moving between them with too many arms, too many eyes. 2 days later, he was gone. The cameras in his cell cut out for 30 seconds. When the feed returned, the room was empty, the door sealed tight. No alarms, no breach, just gone. All that remained was the faint smell of salt water. Rourke said nothing. He just erased Morgan's name from the roster and reminded us of the rule. I wanted to believe Morgan had escaped, but deep down I knew the truth. The lights had called him, and he'd answered. After that, the trench wasn't just black anymore. It pulsed with hidden color, teasing at the edge of vision. Sometimes I'd see faint flickers below us, just enough to catch my attention, daring me to look closer. It was worse during long missions, when fatigue set in and my focus wavered. The temptation to glance downward was overwhelming, like an itch you can't scratch. I learned to keep my eyes locked on the rig, repeating the rule in my head until the urge passed. Still, I wondered what Morgan had seen in those final moments, what brilliance had stripped him of fear. One night, during a storm, we lost power across the upper deck. I was on watch when the blackout hit, plunging everything into silence, but the crash of waves. And then beyond the railing, I saw them, faint lights shimmering beneath the surface, glowing brighter as though feeding on our darkness. My throat tightened as they pulsed in unison, rising slowly, rhythmically, like something vast breathing below. For a heartbeat, I almost leaned over, almost let my eyes lock fully onto the glow. But Callahan's words cut through my mind. They don't come back the same. I staggered back, refusing to blink, refusing to let curiosity win. In the days that followed, I began noticing changes in those who had glimpsed the lights for even a second. Subtle shifts, tremors in their hands, vacant stares that lingered too long, words whispered under their breath as if repeating something learned in dreams. I asked Rourke about it, but he just shook his head. The trench isn't empty, it's alive, and those lights, they're not meant for us. His voice broke on the last word, a rare crack in his armor, and for the first time, I realized he was as afraid as the rest of us. Now I know why Rule 7, never look directly at the lights below you exists. The lights aren't a mystery to solve, not a path to knowledge or wonder. They're a lure, a trap set by something vast and patient, waiting for the moment you can't resist. And the worst part isn't that you disappear when you answer. It's that sometimes you come back, changed, hollow, smiling at things no one else can see. After Morgan vanished, and the lights began appearing more often, none of us spoke much during dives. The silence wasn't just caution anymore. It was survival. Roke gathered us in the operations bay, his face pale in the sterile light. He didn't bother with his usual calm preamble. His words were short and sharp. Rule 8. Never trust the reflection in your visor. At first it sounded ridiculous. How could a reflection be dangerous? But by then I'd learned enough to never dismiss a rule, no matter how strange it sounded. My first encounter with it came only a few nights later. I was doing a routine tether check, drifting along the steel hull when something caught in the corner of my eye. The visor always mirrored back the glow of my lamp, the curve of my helmet, and the faint glint of the rig above. But this time, the reflection wasn't right. My visor showed me hanging still in the water, even though I was moving forward. Worse, my reflection's hand wasn't gripping the tether like mine was. It was raised, pressed against the glass, palm open as though it wanted out. I yanked my head to the side, heart thundering. The real tether was still in my grasp, but the afterimage burned in my vision like a memory that didn't belong to me. I forced myself to keep working, reminding myself over and over that reflections distort under pressure, that the visor curve could warp shapes. But the unease gnawed at me. It wasn't a trick of light. It was too deliberate, too human. Back inside, I stayed quiet, but Callahan noticed the tension in my shoulders. "You saw it, didn't you?" he muttered, low enough so Roke wouldn't hear. I nodded stiffly. His eyes hardened, and he leaned close. "Never let it hold your gaze. If it moves differently than you do, look away. That thing in the visor isn't you." I asked what it wanted. He only said, "To take your place." The next dive, I saw it again. My reflection lagged behind, delayed by a half second. At first it mimicked me perfectly, then its head tilted at an angle mine hadn't. It studied me, not with my eyes, but with something deeper, a hunger cloaked in familiarity. I almost froze, but I remembered Callahan's words and forced my gaze down, focusing on the cables, the bolts, anything but that ghost trapped in the glass. It felt like resisting gravity itself. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to confirm that it was still there. Jensen hadn't been the only one lost to the trench. There were whispers about others, divers who surfaced wrong. Their voices carried an echo that never left, their eyes unfocused as though staring through two worlds at once. Roke never admitted it, but I started to wonder if they'd stared too long into their visors, letting the reflection step forward while they slipped back. The trench didn't just want bodies, it wanted replacements. One night, during a storm drill, I was paired with Alvarez, one of the newer crew members. Midway through the descent, his breathing turned ragged. "It's smiling at me," he choked, thrashing against the tether. I snapped my head toward him, but his visor only showed the usual faint glow of lights. Still, his panic was real. "It's not me. It's not me," he screamed, clawing at his helmet as if he could tear it off. I dragged him back by sheer force, hauling him into the lock. By the time we broke surface, he was unconscious. When he woke, he didn't remember what he'd seen, but his eyes had changed, just slightly, a glassy sheen that never left. After that, I started covering my visor with mud smears before long dives, dulling the shine so I wouldn't have to see myself so clearly. It helped, but only for a while. Reflections find a way. One evening, while I cleaned the smudges off, I caught a flash of something behind me in the glass, a shape moving in the shadows of the rig's mess hall. I turned instantly, but the room was empty. empty except for my reflection, which lingered a second too long before snapping back into sync. The others noticed too. Rumors spread that at night, when people stared too long into mirrors or polished metal, their reflections blinked out of rhythm, eyes narrowing in ways their real bodies hadn't. The crew started covering reflective surfaces, draping cloths over steel panels, turning off polished screens. The rig felt more like a haunted house than a research station. Every shiny surface treated like a doorway, and maybe that's what it was. Not a trick of light, but a door waiting for the wrong glance. I began to dread sleep. Dreams twisted with images of myself moving in ways my body never had. In one, I pressed both hands to the inside of my visor, grinning as cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. In another, I crawled out of my own helmet, skin sloughing like water, leaving something else behind. I'd wake gasping, unsure if the reflection had stayed where it belonged. The trench doesn't take fast. It wears you down. It waits for the moment you're too tired to resist, too curious to turn away. That's why Rule 8, never trust the reflection in your visor matters, because the moment you believe it's harmless, the moment you forget that warning, you'll blink, and the person staring back at you won't be you anymore. The trench has its own way of speaking. Sometimes it's in the distant groan of shifting rock, sometimes in the hum of current against steel, sometimes in the hollow echo of your own heartbeat inside the helmet. But the most dangerous voice of all was the one that came not through the water, not through the radio, but through the very bones of the rig itself. That was the reason behind Rule 9. If you hear knocking from outside the hull, do not answer. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a tool slipping loose in the current, a sharp rhythmic tap against the outer plating, 3 beats spaced evenly apart. I was in the bunk room, alone except for the steady vibration of the generators. The knock came again, softer but deliberate, like fingertips trailing against metal. I froze, straining to listen. It wasn't random. It wasn't the sea playing tricks. It was patterned, and it was close. I told myself it was nothing. Pressure can make sounds lie. The hull groans, shifts, even cracks under strain. But then the knocks started echoing through the corridors, traveling along the walls as though someone walked beside me on the other side of the steel. Wherever I went, the tapping followed, always 3 beats, always measured, always patient. By the time I reached the command deck, sweat had soaked through my undersuit. Rourke didn't flinch when I reported it. He just set his jaw and told me the same thing he told everyone: never answer. Don't knock back. Don't tap code into the walls. Don't even acknowledge it. If you do, it learns your rhythm. And once it has that, it knows how to find you again. Later, Callahan filled in the blanks. A diver named Harlan had been on watch duty months before I arrived. The knock came while he was alone in the observation dome, glass separating him from miles of black water. Instead of ignoring it, Harlan, bored or curious, had tapped back, just once. 3 knocks in return. The sea answered. From then on, wherever he went, the knocking followed. Crew said they'd hear it trailing him down corridors, echoing faintly even when he was on surface leave. Then one night, the sound stopped. So did Harlan. He was gone without a trace. His bunk untouched, his suit still hanging in the lock, only silence left in his place. I tried not to think about it, but the knocks came more often, sometimes faint, like knuckles brushing the hull, sometimes thunderous, rattling bolts until dust drifted from the vents. Once, during a storm swell, the sound hammered against the walls like fists demanding entry. A new tech, Alvarez, panicked and yelled through the intercom, demanding whoever it was to stop. His voice cracked in fear, but he'd answered all the same. The next day, he was pale and jittery, swearing he heard tapping behind every bulkhead. Within a week, his reflection, the one Rule 8 had warned us about, began lagging worse than ever. He didn't last long after that. The worst part is when the knocks come at night. You'll be lying in your bunk, finally starting to drift off, when a faint tap 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 trickles through the walls right by your head. No one else stirs, no one else seems to hear. It feels like the sound is for you alone. The temptation to answer, to knock back, if only to prove you're not imagining it, becomes overwhelming. That's how it gets you. Not with force, not with terror, but with the unbearable itch of curiosity. One night, exhaustion got the better of me. I'd been awake nearly 30 hours on rotation, nerves fried, brain sluggish. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps against the plate, near the mess hall. My hand twitched toward the wall before I even realized. I stopped myself inches away, heart hammering. I could almost feel something waiting on the other side, patient and eager, as if my silence was the only thing keeping it from crawling through. There are theories, of course. Callahan swore it was the trench itself, the abyss testing us, knocking like a predator, tapping the glass of its prey's tank. Jensen once muttered that it wasn't the sea at all, but what lived in it. Survivors who'd been lost, hollowed out and changed, returned to knock in patterns we'd recognize. I tried not to believe either, but I couldn't shake the thought that the knocks carried intent. They weren't just noise, they were conversation. The scariest incident came 2 weeks later. We were gathered in the operations bay when the sound came, louder than ever before. The hull shuddered with each impact, dust raining from overhead. Then impossibly, it shifted into something worse, a mimic of human rhythm. Knock, pause, knock, knock, pause, knock. My stomach turned cold. It was spelling something. Morse code, and Alvarez, poor Alvarez, whispered the translation with trembling lips. Let me in. That night, no one slept. Every creak of the rig set us on edge. Even Rourke looked shaken, pacing the corridors with his jaw tight. The next morning, the knocks stopped, not faded, not softened. Stopped, but silence isn't comfort down there. Silence is just the space before something worse. I don't know what waits beyond the steel, or how it learns to mimic us, but I know this much: curiosity is the trench's sharpest weapon. That's why Rule 9, if you hear knocking from outside the hull, do not answer, exists. Because the moment you respond, you're not keeping the ocean out anymore, you're inviting it in. The silence after the knocking ended was almost worse than the sound itself. Every creak of the hull felt amplified, every shadow too heavy, every breath too loud. We tried to return to routine, but the emptiness pressed on us harder than the water outside. It was during those long stretches of quiet that I first understood the purpose of Rule 10. Never acknowledge the voices that call your name in the dark. I'd just finished a late shift, exhaustion tugging at me as I walked the dim corridor toward my bunk. The rig's lights were set to low power at night, everything bathed in a dull blue haze. That's when I heard it, faint at first, almost like memory more than sound. Someone was calling my name, my real name, stretched thin and soft, floating from the vents like a whisper woven into the hum of machinery. At first, I thought it was Jensen playing tricks. He'd been the skeptic, always sneering at the rules, and I wouldn't have put it past him to try spooking me. But the voice didn't sound mocking. It sounded desperate. It carried the tone of someone drowning, gasping for breath, pleading for help. Against every instinct, I slowed, straining to listen. The sound grew clearer, more insistent. It was unmistakably mine being called, syllable by syllable, spoken with a familiarity no one on board could fake. I almost answered. My lips parted before I caught myself. Remembering Alvarez, remembering Harlan, remembering every warning carved into our survival. If you answer, they said, you give it permission, and once it knows you hear it, the game changes. So I kept walking, heart pounding, every step heavier than the last. The voice followed me, echoing from corners, slipping through bulkheads, always just behind me, never fading until I forced myself into the safety of the bunk room and buried my ears in the thin pillow. Later, Rourke explained it in his clipped way. The trench doesn't just press against steel, it presses against the mind. It listens, it learns, and eventually, it speaks. Some say the voices are drawn from your own thoughts, like echoes of memory twisted by the abyss. Others believe they're not echoes at all, but lures, bait cast into the dark in hopes you'll bite. Rourke didn't care which theory was true. All he cared about was obedience. You hear your name, you keep walking. Doesn't matter if it sounds like your mother or your brother. Doesn't matter if it's your own damn voice. You keep walking. The danger is how personal it feels. When Jensen heard it for the first time, he laughed it off, pretending it didn't rattle him. But that night, I found him pacing his cabin, pale and shaken, swearing he heard his little girl's voice drifting through the ducks. She'd been dead for years, something he never spoke about, yet the sound matched her tone exactly. Fragile, sweet, innocent. He told me it begged him to open the hatch. The next morning, his bunk was empty. The hatch seals were still locked from the inside. The worst night for me came after a rescue dive. We'd hauled up a suit that should have been empty, but wasn't. Shredded remains floating inside, bones cracked by pressure, helmet visor smeared from the inside, as though something had tried clawing out. I lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, when the voice came again. Only this time, it wasn't desperate. It was calm, familiar, my father's voice, clear as if he stood right beside me. "You don't belong here," it said softly. "Come home, just open the door." I clenched my fists, shaking. My father had been dead for nearly a decade. Hearing him in that tone, so gentle, so certain, almost broke me. I nearly whispered back. I nearly gave in, but the memory of Alvarez stopped me cold. He'd once confessed, trembling, that he had answered, just a word, just a weak hello. After that, the voice never stopped. It followed him into every room, every hour, every breath. He began repeating himself, his thoughts tangling, his reflection lagging, until he screamed at it. Then one morning, he was gone. The voices never shout, they never demand. That's what makes them so lethal. They slip into your ear like a secret, quiet enough you question if you imagined them. And once you let doubt in, once you hesitate, you're theirs. The abyss doesn't need force, it just needs acknowledgement. That's the snare hidden in Rule 10. Never acknowledge the voices that call your name in the dark. Last week, during another blackout cycle, I woke to the sound again. Not my father, not my name, but something worse. It was my own voice this time. Same cadence, same breath, same subtle rasp I've hated for years. From the corner of the bunk room, it whispered, "I know you hear me. Stop pretending." I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even close my eyes. And yet deep down, I knew, whatever lived out there had finally found a way to copy me. I still wonder sometimes what would happen if I gave in, if I spoke back. Would the voice fall silent, satisfied, or would I feel the hatch seals unlatch, one by one, hands pulling me into black water without struggle, without chance to resist? No one ever lives long enough to tell us the answer. Maybe that's the point. So I follow the rule. I keep silent. I let the voices pass. But silence doesn't feel like strength anymore. Silence feels like a thin line drawn in salt, waiting for the sea to wash it away. And every night, the line feels closer to breaking. The thing about living at the bottom of the world is that light doesn't belong to us. Down here, illumination is survival. And when it goes, we have nothing but pressure and black water waiting to crush us. That's why the final warning, Rule 11, never stay after the last light goes out, always carried the weight of finality. It wasn't superstition, wasn't paranoia. It was the only barrier between us and whatever waited in the dark. The rig's lights were never supposed to fail completely. Redundancies, backups, emergency glow strips, layers of planning stood between us and total blackout. But even the best systems don't account for the trench's will. I remember the night the failure began. The corridor lights flickered first, like candles threatened by a storm. Then the hum of generators dipped, a low moan vibrating through steel bones. One by one, the overhead sputtered out. leaving only the soft glow of my dive torch against the endless black. At first I thought it was a malfunction localized to our section. I radioed command, but only static answered, broken by fragments of words I couldn't place. Then came the sound, not the knocking this time, not the whisper of voices, but the groan of something brushing against the hull. The steel shuddered, as if touched by an enormous hand. I gripped the torch tighter, reminding myself that the last light was all that mattered. As long as it burned, I had a chance. I wasn't alone in that silence. Jensen had been gone, Alvarez too, but Rourke was still with me, though barely. His face was gray, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. We huddled in the control room, staring at the emergency lights pulsing weakly along the panels. "It's testing us," he whispered, voice cracked. "It wants to see who will break first. That's why the rule exists. Once the last light dies, there's no coming back." He wouldn't look at me as he said it. The glow strips dimmed one by one, shrinking the world around us. Each loss tightened the air, the silence thick with anticipation. I remembered the first time Rourke had explained the rule, how the abyss didn't just wait for darkness, it created it, drawing it around survivors like a noose. To stay after the last bulb failed was to surrender. I asked him how he knew, but he never answered. His silence was answer enough. I thought about leaving early, about donning my suit and ascending before the blackout completed. But when I peered through the viewport, the trench was alive with faint movements. Shapes too large to comprehend drifted beyond the beams, their outlines suggesting fins, limbs, or something stranger. They were circling, waiting, watching. The lights weren't just keeping us safe inside, they were keeping them out. I realized then that stepping into the dark before it was absolute was just another way to die. The final bulb above the control console flickered. Each stutter cast shadows that didn't align with the room, shapes bending wrong, stretching too long. Rourke sank into a chair, clutching his head, muttering names I didn't recognize. The bulb steadied for a moment, glowing defiantly, and in that fragile circle of light, I felt the weight of every lost diver, every shredded suit, every empty bunk. The rig itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what choice we'd make. Then, with a faint hiss, the bulb gave out. Darkness swallowed everything, thick and complete, heavier than the water pressing against the walls. My torch sputtered once, then failed, leaving me blind. In that instant, I understood why Rule 11, never stay after the last light goes out, was more than survival advice. It was a warning carved from despair. Something entered the room with us, silent and vast, as if it had been waiting just beyond the glow all along. I didn't see it. I couldn't. But I felt it. The shift of air, the slow scrape of weight across the floor, the awareness of being noticed. Rourke gasped once, sharp and final, then nothing more. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. My hands fumbled for the hatch, but it was cold, too cold, as if frozen from the outside. I realized the light had been the lock, and now it was gone. Somewhere in that blackness, my name was spoken again, not by a voice, not by a person, but by the trench itself. It was inside my skull, reverberating with pressure, urging me to answer, to step forward, to accept. And I don't remember if I obeyed. Maybe I'm still there, standing in a room that no longer exists, surrounded by an ocean that has already claimed me. Or maybe I escaped, carrying the memory like a weight I can never set down. The last thing I remember clearly is the sensation of opening my eyes and realizing they were already open. The dark wasn't around me anymore. It was inside me, threaded through every breath, every thought. That's the truth. None of us ever admit when we tell these stories. We say we survived, but we don't mean it the way people think. We mean we didn't drown. We mean we didn't implode. But survival down here is different. Survival is carrying the trench with you. And now I wonder if the rules were ever meant to save us, or if they were just ways of delaying the inevitable. If you enjoyed this story, Like, share, and subscribe for more.